So throughout the years, I've seen numerous reaction channels post content to different things, like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or things like that. And as someone who's a big Star Wars fan and a big Lord of the Rings fan, I think that this is such a unique thing to be able to experience as an adult. And so for that, I thought that I would do the same thing, but with reading Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. So this is my copy. I got this off of Amazon. It was $5. You're already starting to see some wear in the binding, so you definitely get what you pay for. But I've never actually read these books before. I tried to when I was younger. I know I definitely tried to read the Silmarillion when I was like 11, and that did not work. So here are some things that I found interesting, or just things that I plain out didn't know. Alright. So there's a 17-year time difference between when Frodo gets the ring versus when he leaves the Shire. And not only that, Frodo and Bilbo actually share the exact same birthday. I'm not really sure why this was omitted from the films. I feel like it wouldn't have really taken away from Bilbo at all. So next up is that Dragonfire can melt rings. When they're in Bag End, Gandalf actually mentions Encagel the Black and how Dragonfire can melt rings. From my understanding, they can melt other rings, but they can't melt the One Ring. Another thing that was cool is that it is mentioned that there are dwarves in the Shire. When I first read this, I was really hoping that some of these were the dwarves from Thorin's company. But later on you find out that it's not, because the dwarves are elsewhere. But I thought it was a cool detail. And speaking of the Shire, before Frodo leaves the Shire, he actually ends up selling Bag End, which I thought was kind of crazy. I'm really hoping that he gets this back in Two Towers. Obviously he won't get it back in Two Towers, but maybe in Return of the King he gets it back. So Frodo, Pippin, and Sam leave the Shire, and this, I'm going to try and include the passage, but they're sleeping somewhere in a forest, and a fox sees them, and the fox, you see like the point of view of the fox, right, and he thinks about them, and he thinks about how weird it is that he's seeing hobbits. This is really what fleshes this world out, and so it gives so much character, to the fox, but it gives so much life to the world. And if we're talking of Pippin, he kind of reminds me in this book, at least in like the first part of it, he reminds me a lot of the book version of Ron Weasley. And here we're coming into characters that are not in the movie, I believe. I don't believe that Fatty Bulger, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, is in the movie officially. But I think he's great, and I think a really funny moment is when he's escorting Frodo, Pippin, and Sam, that they see someone dressed in a dark cloak, and it turned out to be Merry, and he's trying to like dress like a Nazgul to kind of scare them. And I thought that this was just such a perfect moment for Merry. This is something that like really defines Merry as a character.
Hot as hell in this funky ass, hot ass room I'm in. Is that the Grim Reaper?
From there, we meet Tom Bombadil. And Tom Bombadil, I'm going to be honest, is a character that I was really worried about just because of the things that I've heard about him. But I have to say that everything that I've heard about him, I feel the exact opposite. When you go to his house, it's a very, an inviting place. There's a lot of comfort there, but him as a character, I think he's just such a great character. And I'm really hoping that we see more of him in the Two Towers or Return of the King. But I think he's just a phenomenal character. He kind of reminds me of Yoda in The Empire Strikes Back when Luke meets him for the first time and he's kind of trying to test him. From there we go to the Barrow Downs, which is something I actually heard of from TikTok. I'm going to give credit to this creator here who I heard talk about it. And reading about the Barrow Downs and the Barrow-wights, it was really cool because in Rings of Power weeks ago you got to see those. And this was something that I knew before, but in Return of the King, when Merry stabs the Witch King, that it's actually because of one of the daggers that Tom Bombadil gives him, and this is one that breaks the spell that no man can kill him. So it was really cool to come across this part just because I knew it was going to be in there somewhere. From there we go to Bree. That's where we meet Aragorn. We also see like another different company of hobbits. One thing I thought was interesting is that Aragorn already has Nersil at this point, and I'll get into more of this later on. But I thought this was just such a strange contrast to the film. But the film obviously came later, so the film is obviously the weird one. And then later on we meet Glorfindel. And I think Glorfindel is such a great character. I feel like he's like the epitome, at least in this part, of perfection. Just everything he does is perfect, and he's a great character. Later on, before the meeting of the Council of Elrond, I really liked that We got a little bit of a moment with Glóin when Frodo was talking to him. You actually find that Glóin is there at the meeting because he's trying to find out what happened to the other dwarves, Balin, Ori, and Oin, I believe. And like I said before, I've seen the movies, so I know what happens to these three. It's one of those moments that kind of just made my heart like kind of sink. Kind of felt bad for him. One thing I love about this book is that you learn so many small things about different things that you never really considered before. So, for example, the Tower of Orthanc was actually created by the men of Numenor. Or you find out things like Shadowfax, Gandalf's horse, is actually from Rohan. Another cool detail, though, is that you learn that the White Tree, the one in Gondor, is actually planted by Isildur in memory of his brother. I do like that Radagast the Brown is in this for a little bit, though. And I like that it was him that actually sent Gwaihir, who is the eagle that rescued Gandalf. I really liked that they had a little back and forth where Gwaihir actually talks. And Gandalf was like, "How far can you take me?" And he's like, "Not as far as you think." So it was cool to, I guess know that they can talk and hear them talk. And I'm hoping we see more of the eagles and more of them interacting with people. And before they leave Rivendell, Andoril is actually formed, however you prefer to say it. It's actually forged before they leave, and so I actually prefer the movie version of this a lot better because it kind of fulfills his character arc, whereas this, it's not made to be a big deal really at all. Aragorn also seems a lot more willing to be king. He seems like he wants to do it a lot more than he does in the movies. When we get to the mines, we also see that Glamdring, Gandalf's sword, actually glows the same as Sting does, and you see a cool, well, you don't see, but there's a cool scene where Glamdring is glowing and Sting is glowing, and I'm more than sure that this is not in the movies at all. I'm not sure why they omitted this. I feel like this would be a really cool little detail. I feel like this would make for cool visuals. And speaking of Gandalf, his death in the book, it hits you so much harder. One of the benefits of a book over movies is that you get to spend so much time with these characters, and so you really learn to love Gandalf. You learn to love him in the first movie as well, but when he dies here, it really hits you. And another thing that is different that I've noticed is that Legolas and Gimli don't really seem to have this same rivalry, I guess, that they did in Fellowship of the Ring, the movie. There's a funny part in the book where they're going through Lothlorien, and the elves are really suspicious of Gimli. They're kind of treating him, not great, and they want to blindfold him. And he holds, he says, I'm not going to do it, and they kind of suggest that all of the Fellowship should be blindfolded. But later Gimli concedes, and he's like, "Well, I'll be blindfolded if Legolas is blindfolded." And I thought that was I liked that moment a lot. And when they're in Lothlorien, Legolas is actually away from the Fellowship for a decent amount of time. But one thing I really liked is that he takes Gimli with him while he's away, and so it's a really cool bridge between dwarves and elves, and you're told, that they have all these problems, but you really get to see this friendship start to bloom, and I really liked that. So after this is the final battle where the movie ends, except there is no final battle. Fellowship gets shot at after they leave Lothlorien, but that's really about it. Known for a while that Boromir died actually in 2 towers, and I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out now. I'm sure it's going to be similar to this, but yeah, there is no final battle. Much of Frodo and Boromir's exchange is pretty similar. And this is definitely the moment where Frodo kind of decides that, he doesn't want to really continue with the Fellowship. Boromir he doesn't trust, and then he doesn't want any harm to come to Aragorn or the other hobbits. And when it comes to going to Mordor, Aragorn, who's leading the Fellowship at this time, he actually says that it should be Aragorn, Frodo, Sam, and Gimli. And then he says that Legolas can go if he wants to. But I thought this was such an interesting combination, and it's one of those things that I wonder, what if it was that group that went to Mordor? So those are just some of my thoughts, just some things that I thought were interesting about this book or the world of Middle-earth that I didn't really know before. Now, I do have to talk about the cultural and time differences. This book is 70 years old, so there are going to be things that were written back then that don't translate well to today. For example, the word queer is used a lot in this book, and when I was reading that, I was like, wow, this book is really progressive. But it turns out back then, it actually just meant strange. And this book being, 70 years old and being British, like I said, there are going to be differences. They weren't really too bad to get through. You may have to look up a few words here and there, but it's not anything that stops or halts the book or hinders it. As for my issues with the book, I really don't have any. I think this is a phenomenal book. The Old Forest chapter, though, I felt like that was really a slog to get through, and maybe that's, maybe that's good because, it is representing, how difficult it was for them to get through it. But if I were to rate it, I'm kind of scared too because I know that Lord of the Rings is held in just such this high regard. I'd probably give it like a 9.5, 9.75. Like I said, I think that this is a phenomenal book. The Old Forest is a chapter that I really didn't like, and some of the differences, they are there, but like I said, it doesn't really hold the book back. As for Two Towers and Return of the King, and I'm also going to read The Hobbit as well, here are some of my hopes for those books. I'm really excited to get to Rohan. I really hope that we see the Barrow-wights again. I'm really hoping that there's more for the Witch King to do than in the movies. I hope we learn a lot more about him and the Nazgul. Honestly, everything that's in Two Towers, Hobbit, and Return of the King, I'm excited to see. I'm excited to, see the different parts, see the things that didn't really make it into those movies. But I'm also excited to see an expansion of all those things. So in conclusion, this is how I feel about Fellowship of the Ring. These are just some interesting things that I didn't know before, things that were different from the movies, but it was really amazing to step into this world from a reader's point of view. I do plan to do this for Two Towers, Return of the King, and The Hobbit. The Silmarillion I will try later on, but I really do want to know a lot more about this world. I want to know more about like Gil-galad and Melkor and different things like that. And I feel like I won't maybe get those from Two Towers and Return of the King. So I definitely want to know a lot more about this world. But yeah, this book was phenomenal. One of the best books I've ever read. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for sticking through this, and I'll catch you in the next one.